It is 4 p.m. And today is the 18th of May, 2021. And this is the City of Iowa City work session. And welcome everybody. We want to get us started with inviting our city manager, Jeff Fruin, to talk about the American Rescue Plan, funding and associated process. So welcome, Jeff.
Good evening or good afternoon. Nice to see you. Also on March 4th, we gave you an introduction to the American Rescue Plan. At that time, we did not have the city's final allocation of funds. We also did not have the rules yet from the U.S. Treasury. Since that time, the final allocations for entitlement cities have come out, and the rules have also been published as well, the interim rules from the U.S. Treasury. So we've spent the last week or so going through those rules and trying to learn the ins and outs of those. There are still a significant number of questions, but we have a much better idea when it comes to use of the funds, and that's really what we wanted to focus on tonight. But before we jump into that, I again want to just urge the council to really focus on thinking about your guiding principles or your values first, and then focusing on process before you get into the really broad range of uses that you have, that you will have when it comes to determining how to spend these funds. But we did feel it was important for you to have an overview so you can kind of understand what those boundaries may be. So that's the intent of tonight. Rachel is going to walk you through the updates that we have and an overview of the rules, and then we're going to kind of end back at that process and guiding principle point and allow you to take the discussion from there. So with that, I'll turn it over to Rachel Kilberg for the presentation.
All right, thank you, Jeff. Good evening, Mayor and City Council. I'm going to share my screen here. Can I get a thumbs up if we're seeing what you should be seeing? Yes, okay, awesome. All right. So as Jeff mentioned, the U.S. Treasury released their interim final rule on May 9th. I do want to note that it was the interim final rule, so we're still waiting on some clarification in some areas, and they are accepting comments and questions on the interim final rule through the middle of July. So there may be additional changes that will be coming, and we can expect that the final rule, if you will, by maybe early to mid-August. But my goal today is really just to give you a high-level overview, not get into all the details, but just set you up with a baseline of knowledge of what's in this guidance, so you can advance your planning process and set you up to establish those guiding principles that Jeff talked about. So this is just to review what's in the American Rescue Plan. So this is kind of an overview of everything that's in there, all the different types of programs and various relief dollars that will hopefully be trickling down to localities and our residents. But we're focusing on this segment, the 17.6% segment today, which is that fiscal relief, those entitlement funds that are going to cities and localities. So with the Treasury releasing their guidance, they also published final allocations. So this is just a summary again to remind you of some of the funding that will be flowing into our area. So the state of Iowa will be receiving $1.4 billion. Johnson County will be receiving $29.3 million. Iowa City's final amount came in at $18.3 million. And then Coralville and North Liberty have their estimates. They are around $3 million. They've stayed the same. They're estimated at the same amount that you saw last work session. So then I want to cover kind of the timing and some of the spending deadlines here. So the funding, if you'll recall, is going to be delivered in 2 tranches, and this is very intentional by the Treasury. So we'll expect to receive about 50%, hopefully here within May, and then the remaining 50% about a year after that. Like I said, this was very intentional by the Treasury because they want to recognize that there are some immediate needs that are going to need to be plugged pretty quickly, but they'll also understand that our circumstances are going to change. What the circumstances are now as to what they were a year ago, 6 months ago, even a month ago are very different, and they'll continue to change. So recognizing that we may not know what our needs are fully a year from now. And then also, the Treasury does expect that recipients of these funds, that local governments are being very deliberate in our planning and in our planning stage about how we're going to prioritize and how we're going to use these funds. There are some exceptions, but on the whole, the guidance is pretty clear that these funds should be used for prospective uses. So pre-pandemic circumstances can be considered when we're talking about how we might want to use these funds, but on a whole, they should really be forward-looking uses. And then there's 2 kind of big deadlines outlined in the guidance. So the first is by the end of 2024, that is when all funds should be obligated. So the federal government's definition of this basically means that at a minimum, the project should have a contract or a signed agreement in place for the use of funds. And then the second deadline is the performance period for a project using these funds would be December 31 of 2026. So essentially by 2027, the Treasury expects that would be enough time for us to wrap up any projects that are using these funds. Okay. And then I just want to kind of go ahead and dive right in to just a high level overview of what's in the guidance. So they do provide some non-inclusive lists of types of uses that would be considered eligible. And I might mention some of those today as we go along. But overall, eligible uses would fall into these 4 primary categories. So responding to the COVID-19 public health emergency or negative economic impacts caused by the pandemic or made worse by the pandemic. The second category is premium pay for eligible workers who were or are performing essential work. The third category is replacing lost governmental revenue or restoring government service levels to what they were pre-pandemic. And then the final category is necessary investments in water, sewer, and broadband infrastructure. So I'll go into each of these just a little bit further. So that first category here, I have 2 slides to cover it because how I think about this one is really kind of 2 eligible use pieces. We have addressing negative public health impacts and negative economic impacts. So on this slide, I want to cover the public health impacts use. And the US Treasury would consider a public health use eligible for use of these funds if they respond to the pandemic or the virus itself, or if they are responding to a harmful public health consequence resulting from or that was made worse by the pandemic. So COVID-19 mitigation and prevention would be eligible uses. And then other areas of public health that could have suffered from the event, such as these examples were provided specifically in the guidance by the Treasury: behavioral health care, mental health, substance misuse, and domestic violence services. And then finally, the Treasury does address that there would be kind of some broader latitude to address disparities in public health outcomes that were caused or exacerbated by the pandemic. So especially among disadvantaged or overburdened populations, the eligibility of uses gets a little broader. They really wanted to be very intentional in recognizing that the role of pre-existing social vulnerabilities played a big part in driving disparate outcomes. So they want to be sure that these funds can be used to address those disparities. So some of these broader uses, they could include kind of environmental causes that maybe could have worsened pre-existing conditions or impacted health and well-being, such as living in an environment that has mold or poor ventilation, lead paint. Or it could be a use that's kind of as broad as funding public benefit navigators or investing in a community health facility. So really a broad spectrum of the type of uses you could use when they are prioritizing those populations that have been disproportionately impacted. And in this section, the U.S. Treasury does encourage that we prioritize households, businesses, and nonprofits that were most disproportionately impacted by COVID-19 or any of the effects of the pandemic that worsened its impact. So then the second half of that first category is the economic impact uses. So this is really kind of the same test as it is for public health harms. You have to first identify whether economic harm exists, and then you have to identify if that harm was caused by or made worse by the pandemic, and then clearly be able to make that connection between the public harm and how the use of funds are going to address it. So if you've determined that a harm exists, then where that harm exists, you have a very broad latitude again of what you can use it for. Again, the Treasury provides a non-inclusive list of some of these uses. Examples would be assistance to households, maybe things like food assistance, legal aid to prevent evictions, job training for unemployed workers, assistance to businesses and nonprofits who maybe are financially struggling from the pandemic and not able to operate at the level of service that they usually do, or assistance to impacted industries. So some of the industries that they specifically call out in their guidance is travel, tourism, and hospitality. And you could use the funds to kind of drive attraction or help those businesses if they're struggling. So the Treasury does allow us then also to, again, assume kind of a broader eligibility when the funds are used for or in areas of the community and with populations who have been hardest hit. So if they're low income, minority, or an otherwise disadvantaged population, it's going to be considered more reasonable by us by the Treasury to make that connection that between our use of funds and the pandemic's impact on the economic harm. So the encouraged uses by the U.S. Treasury here, for households, they specifically call out prioritizing BIPOC women, low income populations. For businesses, they encourage prioritizing the smallest businesses, maybe those that have difficulty accessing credit, those who have had substantial declines in revenue, have been the hardest hit by unemployment. And for nonprofits, again, encourage using the funds to prioritize those nonprofits that were serving disadvantaged communities and really had to cut their service levels. Okay, and then the second category is premium pay for eligible workers performing essential work. So the guidance defines what eligible workers and essential work means. So an eligible worker would be a worker who was needed to maintain continuity of operations of essential critical infrastructure sectors or additional sectors that were deemed critical to protect health and well-being of residents if it's designated by a state or local government. And then the definition of essential work is work involving regular in-person interactions or regular physical handling of items that were also handled by others. So these are kind of the two tests to determine if a worker would be eligible for premium pay. So if the worker does meet that test, then as the recipient of the funds, we could use it in how we understand the rules today is we could use it in two ways. We could, one, provide that direct premium pay to city staff if they're eligible workers, or we can provide grants to other employers or other businesses who have eligible workers. The way we understand the rules now is that we cannot provide direct premium pay to employees of other employers ourselves. It would have to go through their employer. So how this would work, without getting into too many details, is basically pay up to $13 an hour on top of their base wages. The Treasury does have some kind of maximums built in just to make sure that that premium pay would be going to really those lowest income and lowest wage earning workers. And they provide a couple of examples. I pulled out a few here: healthcare staff, food production, restaurant workers, janitors and sanitation workers, transit truck drivers, those type of industry sectors, that nature of work. And then the Treasury really encourages, again, prioritizing low income eligible workers, so those earning low wages, and they also encourage that we provide retrospective pay, or if this is a use of fund, that premium pay is applied retrospectively for work that has already been completed. They want to recognize that there have been some frontline workers who have been doing work that they have not been adequately compensated for up to this point. So our third category here is one that we're really interested in seeking some kind of additional clarification and guidance on with the final rule. But our current understanding is that we could use these funds for the provision of government services to the extent of the reduction in general revenue relative to the last full fiscal year prior to the pandemic. So that last full fiscal year would essentially be fiscal year 2019. That started on June 30th, 2019. That would be considered our last full fiscal year. And the guidance provides some really detailed methodology for how you would calculate that revenue loss. And then beyond that, we could use it to kind of restore service levels or staffing levels back up to what it was pre-pandemic. Specifically, an eligible use maybe would be any kind of service or project, equipment replacement, or a facility improvement that was planned prior to the pandemic, but paused or delayed because of it. So if it's a use if it's a government use that wouldn't be eligible under any other category, such as the economic impact category, then it would remain ineligible unless it was previously planned, essentially. I do want to call out that the guidance does identify a couple of areas where use of funds towards government service levels would not be eligible and revenue replacement would not be eligible. So as the rules are written currently, replacing lost revenue for utilities is not included as eligible revenue replacement. So then our fourth and final category here is necessary investments in water, sewer, and broadband infrastructure. So the infrastructure that the Treasury is really focused on in this legislation and in the guidance is just in these three areas. So necessary investments is what they're defining for these uses. And I have them listed and I'll go through them here for both the water and the broadband. So for our water, stormwater, wastewater, sewer projects, they would be eligible under this use if they would provide an adequate minimum level of service that meets applicable health-based standards, taking into account resilience or climate change. So this could be capital improvements, projects supporting treatment, management, distribution, or projects addressing climate change. So recognizing if we have infrastructure that would not be able to provide minimum service levels in the case of more frequent or more severe weather events, those would be projects that would be eligible under this use. So in the guidance, the U.S. Treasury encourages that uses under the water infrastructure piece focus on resiliency, again, against kind of natural disasters, increased severe weather events, green infrastructure, and they also specifically call out replacing lead service lines. And then the second part of this is broadband. So their definition of a necessary investment in broadband would be one that establishes or improves service to underserved populations to reach an adequate level for work or school and would be unlikely to be done privately. So their definition for an underserved population is an area that does not have a minimum of 25 megabits per second upload speed and download speed and 3 upload speed. And their definition for an adequate service level is symmetrical 100 upload, 100 download speeds. And they encourage that uses under this category would prioritize those last mile connections where you kind of see some of that bandwidth, some of those bandwidth issues, as well as fiber optic infrastructure where it's feasible. And they also encourage that any of these projects take affordability into consideration. They've also noted that in addition to some of this broadband infrastructure eligible uses under the economic harm use and economic disparities kind of subcategory, you would be able to do things like provide assistance for internet access to households or businesses, or to provide digital literacy training, just kind of to show how some of these different uses can overlap. So that's kind of the 4 uses. And now what I want to do is just kind of review each of those and outline the U.S. Treasury's how they're encouraging use and how they recommend you assess whether your intended use would be eligible. So first, for public health and economic impacts, really the first step is you have to identify if there has been a harmful effect caused by or exacerbated by the pandemic. And then you need to demonstrate how, make that direct connection, how will this use of funds address that harmful effect? In addition to that, you should also be assessing if there's a disproportionate impact of that effect on any certain population or sector, and how your service project or program could address those disproportionate effects, or any kind of compounding effects that made any systemic barriers or systemic disparities worse. So on the second category for premium pay, their test is to first identify, does the worker meet that essential work and eligible worker definition? If they do, then the Treasury encourages that recipients are prioritizing this use towards the lowest income and low wage workers, those frontline workers, and that you consider applying retrospective pay where it would be feasible, in addition to any kind of present or future pay. The third category for government services and revenue loss, like I mentioned, the guidance pretty clearly lays out what that calculation is to do that. And that's how you would determine what revenue loss you could collect for. And then you would also need to be sure to compare any kind of service project or staff reductions to pre-pandemic levels. So again, was this planned prior to the pandemic and we didn't go forward with it because we took fiscal austerity measures or for another reason? And then finally, for that water, sewer, and broadband infrastructure category, for broadband, you need to determine if the project meets that 25.3 kind of underserved definition, and you need to be able to demonstrate that the investment would provide adequate minimum service levels and also be unlikely to be made by a private source. And then for water, storm, and sewer projects, you would need to determine if the project is necessary to maintain minimum health-based standards. And in making that assessment, you can consider resiliency or climate change. So in addition to those 4 categories, another use we can do with these funds is transfer them to another local government, to a special purpose unit of government, a private nonprofit. And in the guidance, they also clarify that you could also transfer to a private entity as long as it's helping you to fulfill an eligible use. So the transfers still must abide by all the Treasury guidance. They still must be used for a qualifying eligible use. We would still be responsible regardless of whether we transferred it or not. The responsibility is still on us to be transparent about posting what the use is, to be reporting on it, to be continually assessing the use. And finally, you cannot transfer the use to another entity to make the funds become an eligible use. So if there's a use of funds that wouldn't be eligible here, but it would be in, say, Coralville, we couldn't transfer it to them just to make it an eligible use, because it wouldn't be for the direct recipient, which is Iowa City. And then finally, that was kind of an overview of what we could use the funds for. And the guidance also outlines explicitly some uses that would not be considered eligible, so ineligible uses. So those would include federal matching requirements, so we could not use these funds as federal match for a grant or another project. The premium pay cannot be used under those definitions. Telework would not qualify as being eligible for premium pay. You cannot use these to contribute to a pension fund. You cannot use these funds for any infrastructure that's not directly addressed. So of course they call out those kind of three categories: water, sewer, and broadband. It's possible that there is a case made for other infrastructure if it's directly tied to mitigating the pandemic or to responding to an economic or public health impact caused by the pandemic. But otherwise, these funds are really not infrastructure funds. These funds should not be used for any contributions to reserve funds, rainy day funds, not for debt payments or issuance of new debt. And again, just calling out that when thinking about replacing lost governmental revenue, utilities is not and is excluded from that. So that would not be an eligible use. So then I just want to kind of remind you of the process that was discussed last time. This was our recommended process, and we still think this is a good path forward. Hopeful that we can kick off this first stage of establishing guiding principles tonight, so that that helps us navigate through these second phases of coordinating with other local governments and starting to provide opportunities for public input. So in light of that, I just wanted to bring up again those draft guiding principles that we shared with you last time. In looking at these and comparing them to the guidance that the Treasury released, they're actually very much in alignment with the guidance and the language that they're using. So that's positive. But we'd really be interested in hearing kind of just some general council discussion on each of these principles. Again, just to help shape that path forward as we'd move along in this process. So with that, I guess I can go ahead and turn it back to the mayor.
Thank you, Rachel, for leading us through that through your presentation. Lots of information there, great information. We've been waiting for the rules, and we got them. We know that it may not be the final rules that have come out, but this is a great starting point from where we were. So I'll just open it up to council just to chime in. And if you have questions for Rachel, please feel free to ask them now.
Rachel, I just want to ask you, when you say low income, did they said like certain percent of the area median income, or they just said low income?
Yeah, they didn't provide any specific percentage of income. They really just clarified low income and the lowest income in some cases.
Thank you, Rachel, for your presentation. Initially, when I looked at some of the basic rules that were sent to us the other day, they were kind of, to be honest, clear as mud to me. I wasn't quite sure how it could be applied or how what the process would be. But you even said that there are still some significant questions, which I think there are. But I think as the process goes along, your presentation will be helpful, and talking as a group will be helpful to clarify those.
All right, I can bring those principles back up for you if you'd like.
That would be helpful. Thank you.
So if I may jump in while these are being brought back up, what I think is important for this discussion here on the principles, I don't necessarily think you need to wordsmith these, but if you can just kind of talk through them and make sure that as staff, we have a good understanding on, where you stand on each of these. And of course, if we're missing something that's really important to you, or you want something stressed in a little bit different way, this is a good time to kind of talk through those. So I caution you against getting too focused on the individual words. We can polish this up and represent it to you for kind of final adoption. But we really just want to know if we're on the right track in presenting these to you. And again, if we're missing anything. These are principles that we would continually hold up to the public as we make our funding decisions, as we have public input opportunities. So again, just a general discussion, and any insight would be appreciated here.
I think that it's going to be really important once the county is at a point where they're ready, that we be able to cooperate and coordinate with the county, because they have the city and the county together have an enormous amount of money. And I think as you may have mentioned last time, Jeff, it would be useful to be able to go out and get public input together, avoid duplication, leverage funds. I mean, at least avoid duplication among these two funds if we can't completely avoid duplication with what's going to be funded by the state. Which is another question, when will we know what will be funded by the state? But I just think locally, in terms of looking at Johnson County and Iowa City, that ought to be a priority.
I
Go
really
ahead.
think that. Go ahead.
No, Maz, I was just going to, on that note, Janice mentioned the state, and now we have a lot of state employees, and Rachel, maybe you could answer this. Would help from them to like their managers that work at the hospital, the nursing assistants, those that are lower paid would be considered lower. Would that assistance need to come from the state then?
Again, so with the ineligible use for premium pay, we would, our only course for using those funds would be for city employees who meet the definitions of eligible worker or essential work. We could transfer funds to another employer. So if those employees are not already receiving premium pay through their employer, through the state, then that would become an eligible use.
Richard, can you bring the slide that's the essential worker again? I mean, like, for example, essential worker, of course, the frontline hospital worker as essential worker. But mostly those workers are not low income. How are you gonna do that? Like, they have to meet all, check all the boxes, essential worker and low income, or buyback community and low income, or just like, because the one that you have it in the beginning say just like, people of, I guess, I don't know if you have it like people of color buyback community, and after that, or or low income, or I don't know. They have to check all the boxes to be eligible, or how this works?
Yeah, so based on our current understanding of the rules, and there's more guidance and explanation, information questions coming out every day on them. That's kind of our understanding right now, is that they would need to meet these two definitions. We know that the Treasury values prioritizing the hardest hit populations, but really the purpose today was just to provide you an introduction, because we know there will be additional clarification coming. We know that there could be some changes to the final rule. We really just wanted to kind of provide you this overview so that it sets you up with at least a baseline of knowledge to discuss what guiding principles you would want to maybe prioritize and figure out down the road when the guidance is more clear, how you'd want to use these funds and who would be eligible and what would be eligible.
I think the bottom line is that you're probably going to have some flexibility to determine eligibility yourself if you want to explore this use. So you're going to have to meet those definitions, and we can sort through that. There's good examples at the bottom of this slide that'll give you a sense of what they're thinking. But my assumption will be that the council could say, we're going to extend premium pay only to those workers that were making less than $15 an hour or less than whatever dollar per hour that you assign, and then you're going to provide some level of premium pay. I think we're going to have that flexibility to kind of set how much premium pay and what makes you eligible. Where we're not going to have flexibility is determining what types of jobs may qualify for this. And again, I think those examples on this slide will give us a pretty good sense of the type of work. Someone that was working at City Hall when we were closed to the public is not going to meet this definition. Whereas, as you can see, a transit driver that was regularly interacting with the public would meet that. So there's going to be those nuances, but I think you'll have that flexibility in determining what wage levels would be eligible for this should you go down that path.
Yeah, but I mean, like, for example, if somebody work, for example, a driver, he is definitely an essential worker. He interacts with everybody every day with the public. But for example, if he get $20 an hour, but that is still make him low income if you add his family to is that means he's not eligible? If we decide, for example, I know that the $15, you give it as example, but it's still, I'm just saying, that's going to make him ineligible, even though $20 for him as a family of 5 or family of 8 is still he's a low income worker.
Yeah,
Yes.
I think you're probably going to be thinking about this in two different kind of categories of uses. The premium pay is just going to be based likely on the wage that they are making at their job, irrespective of their income levels at home. But you can, through the first rule that Rachel presented, provide direct assistance to households that are low income. That's more of the direct stimulus. If you wanted to give $1,000 to families that are under a certain threshold, much like the federal government did with this bill, you would be able to do that. But that's kind of through a different section of the rules that we'd have to work through if you want to base direct assistance just on household income.
No, I was just talking about the premium pay for the essential worker. I'm talking about this person, he have his family and his insurance and everything, how that's gonna be determined. Yeah.
Yep. Those are the sticky details that are yet to come.
Mm-hmm.
For me, Rachel, if you can go back to the first slide of kind of the values. When I look at what was presented to us last time and you've got up there tonight, when we get back to that, as I look through these, I'm really impressed with what staff has put together and am in agreement with what is here to guide us as we make our decisions. I think it's, always we try to leverage outside funding if we can. I mean, if we can put in $10,000 and get $60,000 from somebody else, that helps the people in our community that much more if we can leverage our money. And because we know there's never enough money, I think it's really important that we try to avoid duplication with other relief programs. And I think it's still really unclear how some of that other money is going to be distributed. And so I think it's important that we don't race to make final decisions on how we're going to allocate this money till we have a better idea of how the rest of that pie is going to get distributed and under what rules. you've all heard me say repeatedly over the years, maintaining the financial stability of the city is absolutely important. If we don't do that, we won't be able to give people the services they need going forward. I think the next 2 or 3 just really go together so well. I mean, I think we want flexibility. We don't know what all the needs in the community are going to be as we continue to go forward. Some individuals, some segments of the economy may come back faster than others. Some that we think are going to come back may not and may need more assistance later. And in the next one, that social infrastructure and addressing and mitigating racial inequalities, I think all of those have to be really front and center in our minds as we think about how we're going to use that. And I'm really pleased to see that the Treasury really talking about trying to mitigate those disparities as we prioritize how we spend our money. And the last 3 I think are important, and especially not starting up programs that we don't have sustainable funding for. We really need to be looking at how we spend this on one-time expenses, because this is one-time money. So I'm really comfortable. I'm really pleased with the time and effort that staff has put in to develop these. And I think they're a great framework for us as we start working through more of the details of how we allocate this money.
I think the guiding principles work pretty well. It's a little bit different than what I was finding in doing searches for guiding principles. They're not really focused on specific demographics within a community, but one can read into how one might be able to apply that that kind of approach with these principles to get at those particular groups. For example, youth. I think that's an important particular demographic moving forward that I'm interested in, at least, and I've seen on guiding principles in some of the documents I ran across. It does seem, one thing that's kind of interesting about the program is that it is in kind of 2 different parts. So we have the immediate tranche, which I forget the dates on it, but it is fairly immediate. And so it does seem that the way I began to see that would be that tranche would probably go toward the direct relief part most logically, without wanting to get ahead of ourselves. But it does seem that's where that percentage of the funding would be emphasized. But there is a second tranche and a fairly long period in which all of this could be implemented. So, some of the other guiding principles, such as, lasting change in the physical and social infrastructure, those sorts of things would, I think, which would require more time, there is the time to do that and to get more into kind of long-term planning. The other thing that I found interesting and challenging about this is, the rescue plan is one of 3 federal funding programs. We have, in addition to the rescue plan, we have the American Jobs Plan, which hasn't been approved yet, but it's out there. And then the American Families Plan, which, the estimates are that would be $1 million with $1 trillion and 800 billion in tax credits. So you add all these up, you're talking about close to $6 trillion. And there seems to be potentially, or certainly these programs to overlap to some degree. So how we integrate and plan that is challenging because they are in different timeframes. The American Jobs Plan is a 8-year infrastructure plan. But nevertheless, I think we need to try to keep in mind that the fact that there most likely will be additional large funding sources becoming available, and to try to anticipate them as we move forward It sort of speaks to the avoiding duplication or things of that sort, so that we have the best understanding of what funding is best applied when and with what sources. But yeah, I think as a starting point, this all seems like a good starting point, and it was certainly useful to see what detailed information we have now in terms of what will be eligible, what won't be eligible, and so forth.
For me, I think the guiding principles are, just something good for us to kind of have as a baseline. There's a few that resonate with me and a few that don't. As far as like what would be my, priority here. And John just mentioned that there are 3 types of programs out there that'll be forthcoming. And so a part of the challenge is not knowing exactly how those funds will be recommended for use. When we're talking about not duplicating, other relief programs, that's number one. We don't know some of the other relief programs and how that's going to impact our local community. And so that becomes a little bit of a challenge. And I don't know the projections of when those rules will come out and when those funds will be available. But nevertheless, I do believe that leveraging outside funding and avoiding duplication with other relief programs is critical. Although I do believe that there are some programs already out there that do have barriers for certain people within our community. And I think learning what those barriers are to try to figure out how can the funds that we have help overcome some of those barriers. So um, I'm in full agreement about potentially not duplicating some of the relief efforts. Now, if there's a relief effort that is only giving, for example, $100, towards some type of a relief, COVID relief program, that may not be sufficient, for that, for the recipients. It could be all the funds that's available through that entity. And so that's something that we also have to keep in mind, that some programs, they are helping people, but it may not be sufficient funds available to really meet the needs of the people. So number one is great, but I think there's a little more things that we need to think about. Retaining flexibility to address evolving emergent community needs. I think we're going to continue to see needs that are rising in our community. There's a lot of nonprofits that work really hand in hand with some of our most neediest residents. And I think listening to some of those concerns that we may not even anticipate would be valuable for us to just keep those lines of communication open so that we can maybe have some conversations to really meet some of those needs as well. Ensuring funding decisions to help mitigate racial inequalities. I think we all know that there are some barriers and some inequalities that has happened throughout this pandemic. And I think just making sure that we hear some of those, make sure that we respond to those is going to be critical. And then certainly that'll be hearing from our communities as to how we can help with that. Limit operational investments without identified sustainable funding sources. So I do believe that we should, ensure that whatever is sustainable. But here, I do wonder a little bit of what this totally mean. I guess I was a little confused by this one here and maybe you can explain that to me.
Yeah, so really recognizing that this is a one-time influx of funds. So if you want to expand some type of service, and the easiest example may be a service that requires an employee or multiple employees to carry that out, we may be able to fund an employee's salary for 2 years or 3 years with these funds, but there will become a time in which these grant funds aren't available. And we may or may not at that time be able to retain those employees to carry out that service, or keep paying the nonprofit to keep those employees paid so that they can continue that service. It's not to say that we can't, and there may be some strategic opportunities to do this, but if we put too much in the operational side of things, I'm afraid that 4 or 5 years from now, a lot of those gains will be erased by an inability to keep the necessary funding behind those efforts.
Okay, now I understand. Thank you so much. And um, I, I would certainly agree that um, at least for these funds, absent all other funds, for operational investments, I believe that the funds that we give should be limited. I'm not saying that we wouldn't consider, other things, but it really should be limited to um, these funds usage. And so um, that would be at least my perspective at this time. The other thing that I might mention, um, I would agree that our city financial stability is super important. Is vital for us to survive. In absence of knowing all of the other opportunities that we have, $18.3 million is a lot of money. It is a lot of money. Very grateful for the funds that we're being given and by the federal government and asked to shepherd over. But I also know the needs in our community are greater than $18.3 million. And that's where I think it's a huge number. I, will tread lightly on really looking at some of the operations of our government. I do know that we have needs, exactly. We can use some of these funds, but I think once we start to look at what are all the needs in our community, what are all the funds that we have through other programs, I believe we're going to find a great need that, again, it won't be enough money no matter which programs we're utilizing. I'll be very interested in how the state utilize their funds, because we haven't, we don't know what they're going to do and how they're going to support and who they're going to support. I just believe that ensuring that individuals and households are a priority. We do have businesses that absolutely need support as well. I think we have to look at our entire community, certainly hearing from our community to hear what their needs are is going to be vitally important. So these funds are something that I certainly want to have some of those listening opportunities, some of those public hearings to hear what the public has to say about the funds, and partnering with others within our community, and even listening to what the state is going to do so that we can partner in giving out these funds. I think that'd be crucially important.
I haven't go through each one of those. I was just asking question in general, but I really mostly agree with what the mayor said. And in additional, really this time I hope you guys contact the community. We need to listen from the community and find out what the needs is. And not only that, you have to keep on mind what work for certain group doesn't work for other group. So those kind of things we have money, we need to make it the people like easy to access the fund that we will provide. I feel like the city, when you come up with rules, either to conduct the council on those rules or seeking opportunity from the people from certain community to see what work for them best, what doesn't. Those two things since this is from the city and we are the one who's setting up the rules, as long as we're following the guidelines, I think we can make it very easy for our community to access it.
So further to what the mayor and Mayor Pro Tem said, I have a question about eligibility. And that is, we talked about nonprofits that, in that community, there's a portion of the nonprofit community on which a lot of people actually depend, and certain people in the BIPOC community particularly depend on some of the churches. It seems that, you know, there's also, of course, separation between church and state, but I'm aware that there are many in the BIPOC community really have leaned on the churches, on their churches. Some of their churches have closed because since there's less money, since there's less funds to go around, less funds to give, some of those institutions are no longer there, those support institutions. And that's where people go. So I guess my question is, within this framework in general, and within the framework of talking about discussing transferring funds, is it possible in at least in certain circumstances, because as Mayor Pro Tem said, different communities go to different institutions and approach things differently. Is it possible to include some of the churches in this, or is that a non-starter?
I can give that a shot. So churches weren't explicitly mentioned, but our transfer of funds, I see it as through the guidance could happen two ways. It's either one, to provide assistance to another entity that is providing a service that we deem is critical to addressing an economic or public health impact. Or what I think you're getting to is more of transferring the funds over to administer some sort of service or program that would address an eligible economic or public health use. And I think that the Treasury was pretty intentional in trying to make that transfer ability pretty broad. And I believe that that would be an eligible use.
Thank you.
I think another thing that we have to keep in mind are when we're looking at groups of individuals is those folks such as the immigrants and refugees that perhaps hadn't qualified because they weren't receiving unemployment or those kinds of things from federal government assistance. And they still do need some assistance, as most of them possibly were disproportionately impacted by COVID. And I think this is one thing that we need to look at as far as a guideline for who to assist, and looking at the nonprofits to help us find those groups of folks.
Just to jump off what Pauline was just saying, I think, and also the mayor mentioned this, kind of finding the gaps. And so as we're looking at avoiding duplication, I think being cognizant of what other programs, what the availability of other programs and types of relief have occurred up until this point, and making sure that we're, just like we did with some of the individual relief funding that we did earlier in the pandemic, like trying to target those members in our community and even organizations and entities in our community who kind of got left out in different ways, I think is an important guiding principle. Because as the mayor said, there will be more need than there are funds available. At the same time, I think it's going to be a difficult process to kind of get to that. How do we allocate and spend this money? I mean, I'm sure nonprofits are having a similar kind of, I guess, struggle as we may find ourselves having in, this is being just such a one-time thing. Some of it is hard to even imagine what the distribution might look like. So I just think looking for gaps is important. And as I see this list of principles, all of them resonate with me as well. I think the racial inequity and climate action are the two that kind of stand out as more sort of subject matter oriented. And I almost see them as, everything else is, as we're doing, whatever we're doing, we're trying to achieve or meet or be led by those principles. And then, also just making sure that it's kind of like, I don't know, in my mind, I'm just sort of seeing layers of umbrellas of all these principles as well. So just prioritizing, I think, those two in accord with like lasting change due to the one-time nature of this. I think those are most important to me.
All right, well, I think we have had a good discussion about these funds. It's good to know that we finally got some rules to go with it, because not having the rules is, we were kind of, in the dark about what it could be used for. So it's helpful that we're at this point now. Any other questions for Rachel or any other comments?
Mayor, if I may, just in terms of next steps, we'll continue to reach out to the county, to the other cities, and gauge their temperature for collaborating, at least initially, on some public input, and then we'll see if that evolves into larger collaborations with the funds. In the meantime, I feel like we have enough out here to at least open up the opportunity for folks to formally provide comment to the city. Clearly, you're getting some of that now, which is good, and informal contact is always encouraged. But I'd like staff to begin to put together some basic education materials for the public, maybe short videos, summaries of Treasury guidance, and then a portal or a forum survey of some type for them to submit their thoughts. I don't want to get ahead of the county collaboration if indeed that is in the cards, but we have enough to begin that process. And with your go ahead, I think staff can work on that in the next week.
How are you thinking about the people to have feedback to the city? Right?
Yeah, I think it's going to be multifaceted to start, or through this whole process. To start, I think we just need to get basic information on our website and provide a basic survey or input opportunity. And then we'll have to become a little bit more nuanced with in-person engagement activities, perhaps in different locations. Those are the types of things I'm hoping that we can really do with the county, so that individuals that want to provide that feedback don't have to go to 2 or 3 different meetings to share that with their local elected officials. So what I'm suggesting now is not a comprehensive public input strategy. It's more of a start to get the information out there, more than just what was presented at a city council meeting, with the understanding that probably where you're going with your comments, Mayor Pro Tem, is we're going to have to do more work to meet people in their locations at their times, in ways in which they feel comfortable providing that input.
Yeah, that's exactly what I want to say. Thank you. I don't know, but I think reaching out, people just go do a listening post somewhere here and there, speak out, speak event or something like that. Anyway, we as a council need to reach out to people in their place during this. Now everybody is vaccinated. Probably I'm gonna have mine on Friday maybe. So we will, just start going out.
Yeah, I think along that line, it's also going to be important to, as we produce this information, to push it out in particular to the whole NGO or nonprofit community, so that they also have that information when they come in contact with their various different clientele.
Yes, that's great.
And Mayor Pro Tem, you mentioned the language barrier and translation. Hopefully we'll be able to provide that where necessary.
Sure, that's true.
All right, well, great. Sound like we will be moving forward with that. We are on to the next item, which is clarification of agenda items. I did have one item I wanted to bring up, and that is our community comments. We've typically, we value the public comment. I think it really does provide an opportunity for us to hear from the public, get a sense of their perspective individually as individuals come to address us. And so we've had on the public comment, we typically have 3 to 5 minutes listed. And I wanted to, point out that oftentimes I, as the mayor, and will look at how many hands are raised or how many people want to speak, and then I have to adjust it to ensure that we allow everybody within our power an opportunity to speak. And so I've gone as low as 2 minutes for individuals to speak. What I would like to propose is that we actually, set it at 3 minutes, the public comment. And then if I need to, adjust the time, then I won't go lower than 2 minutes, because sometimes we do have a lot of people that want to give their thoughts to council in a public meeting. And so we certainly want to hear from the people. So I just wanted to get a sense of council thoughts on changing the community comment to 3 minutes. Now, there are some things that we have to always allow, that we have the public, the open public hearing. We have to ensure that the public come and speak on that. That itself would also be 3 minutes. So I wanted to make, or anything on the agenda will be set at 3 minutes, and I would adjust to 2 minutes as necessary. Another thing to consider is when there is a developer, or is someone's item on there, they may be granted more time. So I just
that's what the problem, Mayor. I really respect what you said, but the problem is we have to guarantee more time to some people. And I guess public comment is the only time the public can interact with us. Sometimes even we saw people needed more than 5 minutes. But I hope if we can just leave it as it is, adjust it as needed. For example, leave it at 5 minutes as it is. It's been forever like this. Nothing has been changed. And you know that sometimes we don't even have public comment, be one person or two. If we can leave it as that, but we have to put a policy. If there is a lot of people on the room, you need to adjust it to 3 minutes. Go ahead and adjust it to 3 minutes. But I really believe that sometimes we have a lot of people, sometimes we don't. And if we can give the developer 5 minutes to present themselves, I think our residents and public need that too. Yes, let us make it, yeah, that's my own idea. I really encourage you to leave it at 5 minutes, but with the clear language that the mayor have the right to adjust the time if it needed, when a lot of people will be there. This is happening in Des Moines. People was very mad about it. We don't want to make our people mad too, This is the only time we listen to the people. They waited 2 weeks, and so they can talk to us. And I just like when there is a really hot issue, people like to come in person and speak about it. They send emails and everything, but they like to come so everybody can see them bringing this issue.
I think one of the questions that I would have is, we have the community comment, and when we do have, we'll have an item on the agenda. Is there a certain amount of time that we would allot or think that we would hear from the community on an agenda item? Is that 30 minutes? Is that, because I think that's what it comes down to.
For public comment, you mean?
Yes.
For public hearing?
I think it could be for any agenda item. Like, what is I think we need to have some type of a time frame that, because I look at the hands and I kind of figure out where we are throughout the process. Certainly, we want to ensure that people are heard when that agenda item comes up. But that is something that we have to consider as well.
I'm sorry, I really don't get you. Do you mean public comment after the consent agenda, or are you talking about public comment during an item on the agenda?
I'm mixing up the two. We do know that we have for the public comment time only, no agenda item, It ends at 7 p.m. and then we can come back to it after. Yeah, so I guess this would really be related to something that's on the agenda.
Oh, okay.
If I can give you some perspective of 11, almost 11 and a half years on council, my recollection is historically we did not allow 5 minutes. I think it was typically 3 minutes. I think if it's set at 3 minutes and people know it is 3 minutes, I think that is ample time for somebody to come in front of council and give us their views on a particular item. They are still more than welcome to call, to email, to get more information to us. But I think if people know ahead of time, 3 minutes is a fairly decent amount of time to, I believe, talk to us and express their views, and also make sure that we can hear from as many people as possible, and that way they know how much time they have. Historically, I believe we have used that same 3 minutes in the community comment at the beginning of the meeting, which used to go till 8 o'clock when we started at 7, but now goes till 7 because we start at 6. And we use that same 3 minutes typically for each agenda item, if people wanted to speak on the agenda item. Mayors in the past would shorten that potentially to 2 minutes if we had a lot of people. And I don't know that we ever set a specific time limit on how long we took public comment. I know as a council, we always tried to let everyone speak. But I think there were times where probably after an hour and 30 minutes, maybe if it was a really, really hot topic, that the mayor would finally, close it down. But when it's a really hot, contentious topic like that, it has always been the council's purview or I shouldn't say that. It's always been the council's intent to try and listen and hear from as many members of the public as wanted to, and to do that. Like I say, lots of times it has gone, say, from the 3 minutes down to the 2. I'm very comfortable with that. I think if the public has noticed that's what we're doing, we are not in any way diminishing their opportunity to communicate with us.
Yeah, I think it's on agenda items, something where in my experience, I don't think we want to limit the actual time frame where those comments could be heard. The 3-minute rule certainly makes sense, I think, for the community comment period. I think I've seen comment on agenda items where it can be extended beyond that, or where someone has something to say that goes beyond 3 minutes, and it didn't seem out of place. I think one of the issues that comes up often with when you have many people coming to speak is that there will be most likely people will begin repeating one another in some ways. And so I think, Mayor, you could say something to the effect of, if what you had planned to say has already been said, perhaps you could just reference the fact that it had been said rather than repeating it, so that we don't get that kind of duplication. That's one way of trying to keep the pace of the meeting going at the right pace. But yeah, community comment, it seems 3 minutes is reasonable. And it's potentially reasonable on agenda items, but I think it really depends on the item and what people have to say.
I think the question of 3 versus 5 minutes is almost less important than just making clear what we're doing, and so that people know what to expect when they're heading into a meeting. I think it's very reasonable to say, in the mayor's discretion, if there's a whole lot of people, particularly for the public community comment for items not on the agenda, to try and, ratchet that down like to the 2 minutes, just for the sake of time, and people know that they can reach out to us. If it's an item that's not on the agenda, there's not a risk of us, taking some action that evening because we didn't hear a couple of minutes more of a particular comment, they can always reach out to us by email or individually, or come back at the next meeting. So I'm comfortable with that as long as we communicate it, and just try and be consistent with it. I do think for public hearings, it should be more open. I think, and I don't know if Sue would want to weigh in. I don't know if we have an obligation to a certain minimum, so to speak, on a public hearing. I think it is a different issue if it's for items that aren't on the agenda. And I think we choose to allow comment on all items, even if it's not a public hearing. But I think if we're, again, being consistent and sort of governing the manner in which we do that.
I would not go less than 2 minutes on a public hearing. I think 2 minutes would be okay. And the only other thing I want to just follow up a little bit on what the mayor said. Historically, let's take a typical example of a zoning matter where you've got a developer and then maybe 10 neighbors in opposition, let's say. So if all the 10 neighbors get all 5 minutes and they have 50 minutes, the idea is that the developer probably shouldn't be limited to 5 minutes. That developer would get a little bit more. That's kind of the idea on when it's somebody's item, so to speak, to give them a little bit more time, because there tends to be more time taken up in the quote unquote opposition. That's just the reason historically that the typical example being a developer getting a little bit more time because of that, so the time adds up a little more even. We certainly could limit the developer to 2 or 3 minutes too, but just from a historical standpoint, just FYI.
Yeah, we've usually let the developers, if they have a presentation, we've usually allowed them to give their presentation, and typically they have been within reason, because usually we have staff doing a presentation first and then the developers will follow up with any additional points. But in 11 plus years, I don't recall too many times that we have felt that the developers were unreasonable in terms of going excessively long. But as council, we wanted to make sure we had all the information we needed about the project. And so we've allowed them, and as Sue said, we, depending on the project, we may have had as much or a lot more time in opposition potentially.
And it's not just, in addition to developers, there are other people as well. We had the issue with Rochester Avenue and the complete streets, and a group of residents that came in and did a PowerPoint presentation. And I don't recall how long it lasted, but I'm sure it lasted more than 3 minutes, and it was very well put together and very informative. So I guess I would be comfortable with as the 3 minutes for community comment, and then what turns out to be necessary for agenda items, particularly when there are public hearings, because then those are specifically items that are specifically on the agenda for that evening, in which we need to get full information.
I would add one more thing. Oftentimes when we've had comments by people in the public, if they're aware that it's going to be 3 minutes, or even in the past when it was 5 minutes, what would happen is the public would coordinate individuals to come simultaneously to give parts of the presentation. And so the council would have the full presentation. It would just be given by 3 people. So I know that there will still be ways for the public to give a holistic type of a presentation if they wanted to do it, at the meeting. Also, as Councilor Burgess mentioned, certainly people can reach out to us individually as a council, come back to another meeting. It does sound like even, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mayor Pro Tem, that the 3 minutes for the public comment, everybody agreed upon that. Is that correct?
I'm not, but they are. I just want to keep in mind that also I want to tell you that sometimes we don't have enough time for those people. Sometimes you read a lot of proclamation there. It takes a lot of time from the public, and we have only 15 or 20 minutes left. And we divide that into 3 minutes. It's okay for me, but it's still we have to keep in mind, if we use the most time of the public comment for reading some proclamation, or we have something in the beginning, we have to keep in mind that we are not going to end at 7 p.m. sometime. You know, because how long we give the public from our time? How long? Is it 30 minutes? 45 minutes? You have to be clear on that too.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. And so, so when we have the public comment, we go to 7 p.m.
Yes.
But if the public comment for whatever reason doesn't start till 7:45, let's say, I guess I would propose that we, we have the until 7 p.m., but 30 minutes, minimum of 30 minutes. So I can adjust it, to 7:15 if need be, because we've had a lot of, things on the front end of the agenda. And we had just experienced that not long ago.
Yeah, and I don't think people should wait for us until we end our meeting so they can come and speak. And they have a lot of things to do. They don't have obligation to stay until the end of the agenda.
It's a rare occurrence where we don't have 30 minutes minimum. But would council be in agreement that I can, maybe we'll have it so that it's very clear until 7 p.m., but minimum of 30 minutes? I'm seeing some head shaking. Okay. So we'll go with that. And then I think it would be, because we want to be clear, I think it would be 2 to 3 minutes for the public comments so that people know what to expect.
I just think say 3 minutes. You have a maximum of 3 minutes.
Max of 3 minutes. Okay. That makes, yeah, maximum of 3 minutes. And then we don't have listed on agenda items, anything related to, the public comment time. So again, that'll be at the mayor's discretion, as it has been in the past, where it will be adjusted. So I'm comfortable with the 2 to 3 minutes there. Of course, if there's a developer or someone who has that agenda item, oftentimes we know when they're going to be present to speak as well. And so we can have conversation with them beforehand, especially if they have a presentation or they need, to present a PowerPoint. All right, any other thing on this item?
Mayor, I think with your permission, we can add some language to the agenda. Right now, the agenda doesn't provide any details on the community comment portion. It's lacking of those details. So with your permission, we'll just take what you discussed here and put that actually into the written agenda for every meeting going forward. Is that okay?
Yes, please. And I'm, seeing some nodding of the heads.
Yeah,
Thank you.
good idea, Jeff. And also I think maybe once we get to in-person meetings, that's going to happen sometime soon, I hope, where there'll be a better idea of how many speakers. Because right now, I think you maybe are the only one, and maybe Kelly, to see the number of hands that are up. So if people know that there's still 20 people out there in the room, like former mayor, when we were in person, you see the people lining up, there's 20 people. So that it's going to be probably 3 minutes or maybe even the 2 minutes. So I think that could change it, change the picture a little bit, but I'm okay with the 3 minutes max.
In the recent, I've been just stating how many hands are raised, so that people all know how many hands are raised. I'm happy that I actually found that there's a number at the top, and I was going down counting. So now I know that I could just look at the number and quickly say how many people have their hand raised. And I kind of wait and pause until I have all the hands raised and kind of make a statement that I see these many hands at this point. So I think that it helped for just better articulating how many people want to speak during that time, and where I am making the decision to, allow 2 to 3 minutes.
It doesn't matter now because I think also some people will raise their hand after the fact. So I know that maybe after you go 30 minutes or after 7 o'clock, and you make sure you did the 30 minutes, as long as some people inside that time frame, they can still, even if they raise their hand late, they can still speak because we're still on that time frame.
Absolutely.
That's what I really want to see. And also, as Bolly mentioned, if we went back to in person later, I really want to again to remind you if we could, if and see if the staff is really working on bringing like a timer, just like the school district they had in their meeting. That's really clear. That's really good. So the person will know it become red when it's like few seconds, and they know they have to stop. And this way we don't have to count. We can just listen to them.
Sure. And I'll work with staff, and we may, institute where we can even quickly virtually.
Yeah,
That's
that could be happening too. Yeah, we can have a timer virtually. I saw it somewhere.
Yep. So I'll work with Kelly on that. All right. Any other item from the formal agenda? Okay, we're going to move on to info packet from May 6th. Info packet from May 13th. All right. Council updates on assigned boards, commissions, and committee.
The CPRB had its forum last evening, lasted about an hour and a half, fielded a lot of questions from the public, and Chief Liston also personally fielded a lot of questions. I thought it was a very productive and helpful forum to have.
Just from the UNESCO City of Literature, it is actually in our info packet of May 13th. IP5 is the annual report, which I hope everyone will take a look at.
Great. All right. Well, if nothing more, we will be back at 6 p.m. And we want to wish Mayor Pro Tem a happy birthday. And we will see everybody back at 6 p.m.